Howdy pushers, and welcome to episode 22 of Pushing Cardboard. I'm your host, Grant Linneberg. As we struggle through the hottest summer on record, hopefully you're somewhere cool and breezy listening to this. And to help with that breezy feeling, I'm trying something a little different and talking about games on a common theme this episode. The First World War in the air. So, breezy. I have to say I'm a little late this episode. I let July go by without releasing a podcast. That's the first month I've let go by without at least one episode since I started this. Sorry about that. I know we're all a bit starved for good wargame podcasts at the moment, as many of my favorites are intermittent or on hiatus. Last episode of mine was downloaded a ton, so thanks for that. But I have to mention that despite my call out for some feedback, I only received a single response in terms of ideas for future episodes or thoughts about what was presented. I get that. Podcasts don't exactly make it easy to respond. You download it, you listen, you may have a response, but you'd have to go to the website to do it, or Apple Music, or who knows where. You may have the best of intentions about responding, but the episode finishes while you're in your car, and by the time you're home, you've forgotten all about it. So I get it. But I'll just reiterate this. A little interaction with regular listeners goes a long way to making this a less lonely endeavor. I'm grateful for the downloads, grateful for the listeners. To that end, just like last episode, if you've got a question you'd like answered or a topic discussed, drop by the website or drop me a line at grant@pushingcardboard.com. I'll be happy to add a mailbag portion to the podcast or something like that. And topic ideas are always appreciated, even if I can't act on them. On to news and what I've been playing. In terms of news, well, I have to give another shout out really to Rally the Troops. They just keep adding to their lineup of games you can play live or asynchronously. Recently added were Time of Crisis from GMT, as well as The Field of the Cloth of Gold from Hollandspiel. So if you haven't tried it out yet, these online versions of the games also enforce the rules. Theoretically, you can play without even owning the game. But, don't be a dirtbag. Buy the games, support the designers and publishers, obviously. In other news, GMT announced their latest shipping games. For me, that means Mark Simonich's North Africa 41 and the latest Levian campaign game, Plantagenet. I'm really excited to try the North Africa game. Simonich's early game on the topic, The Legend Begins, is a favorite with me, so it'll be interesting to compare them. New to the P500 list are a reprint of 3 Days of Gettysburg, as well as Thunderbolt. This latter is noteworthy as I think it's the last game Richard Berg was working on when he died. His friend Mark Herman has finished it. It's a third game in a series, and GMT is making it available as a standalone game or in a deluxe version with all three games in one box. I don't do a lot of Ancients gaming where this game is set, but the deluxe box was too compelling for me to pass up. GMT also announced a rare deletion from the P500 list. Carl Paradis' No Retreat Battles 1942 has been delisted as it apparently wasn't gaining enough traction. Who knows if Carl will attempt to publish it elsewhere. I was sad to see my P500 request deleted. GMT also announced that they will be doing a yearly errata counter sheet. I imagine this will be much like what comes with issues of C3I magazine, but in this case, you can get it without the magazine. Also, it's cheap, and GMT eats the shipping cost pretty much. So stop by gmtgames.com and sign up for that. The Charles S. Roberts Awards winners for 2022 were just announced. You can find all the winners and the nominees at their website. As always, it generated a fair bit of grumbling and whining surrounding them. I think the awards are in good hands now, and they're just going to get better and better. It's not like the new crew is going to be able to fix things overnight. It's going to take a year or two before all their changes can be well thought out and implemented. In the meantime, just remember who to vote for when they finally get around to adding a best podcast episode category. If you're a fan of the Undaunted series from Osprey, the first volume, Normandy, is now available on Steam as an early access game. That means you get it for a cheaper price while it's still in development. The digital developer here is Bookmark Games, who I don't know, But I'm happy to see that it isn't Hex War, whom I've not had good experiences with and who seem to do a lot of war games. And then a bit of news fresh from the internet. Herman Luttman, recent winner of the Game of the Year at the Charlies, has posted that his games will no longer be available from White Dog Games. I reached out to Herman to try to get more details, but alas, I got no response from him. I'm sure he'll have his say somewhere, as will White Dog as well. My only other news this episode is that, God willing, and the creek don't rise, I'll be heading to San Diego HISCon this November. I'll be able to reconnect and argue with my good buddy Harold, as well as meet a few more friends that I've only spoken with online, such as Mark Johnson from War Games to Go, Dan Bullock of Game Design Deep Dive, as well as Own Designs, and David Thompson, co-designer of the Undaunted series, as well as a ton of the best-loved solo games out there. I'm sure I'll have more to say about this as it gets closer, but if you're going as well, please reach out, say hello, hit me up ahead of time. Maybe we can get a game in or an interview or just meet in the flesh. Oh, and I think Grant and Alex of the Player's Aid will also be there. So it's going to be a meeting of the content creating Grants. So much burly handsomeness in one room. It'll be amazing. What's on the table this month? Well, pretty much the same games as last episode, so I'm not going to recap all of that. Nothing is finished. However, I did add one new game to the PBEM rotation. I'm playing Compass's games Death in the Trenches. Wow. A unique game system with tons of random events and a combat system I haven't seen before. I'm playing the Entente, and Terry Simo, who knows something about the First World War after designing Bloody April, is playing the Central Powers. We've just started, but his Huns are coming at my Bosch hard and going through them like butter so far. In terms of new games to the collection, I did get a few new games, but the majority were used this time out, and I traded a couple out of the collection as well, so not a bad month all in all. On the new front, On to Richmond 2 is certainly new. I haven't unboxed it yet. Maybe I'll just leave it in shrink and sell it for $500 in a couple of years when MMP doesn't reprint it. From Flying Pig, I had ordered the update kit to A Most Fearful Sacrifice, and then to make it a little more worthwhile in terms of shipping, I also ordered Old School Tactical Volume 1. I've never played that system before, so it felt like a good time to try it out and sort of split the shipping cost a bit. And then my final new game is the latest Blind Swords game from Revolution, A Grand Havoc. This system is pretty much an auto-buy for me, and this game looks great. It's an interesting brownish map this time, as there was a bit of a... the battlefield was a bit drought-stricken at the time, apparently. Anyway, it looks good. As for old games and trades, maybe the most interesting title I got is Omaha Beachhead, a Victory Games title by Joel Balkowski. As well, I got a trio of old Avalon Hill titles that I'd missed along the way. Alexander the Great, Bismarck, and Battle for Italy. That last one is an earlyish Kevin Zucker Napoleonics game that came in. It's a small box. I'm thinking it might be a good introduction to his work, as I haven't played any Kevin Zucker games. Back in the day when I was buying AH titles when they were still being produced, I wasn't much into Ancients, so I never bought Alexander, so I'm happy to get that now. And as for Bismarck, I hear it's a good game. It was a good price as part of a lot, so why not try it out, was my thinking. Okay, for today's dive into a couple games, I'm going to do something a little different. Instead of a deep dive into one or two games, I'm going to look at 4 games on the same subject, World War I air war games. I've been interested in this subject for as long as I've been a war gamer. My first sort of war game was Dogfight by Milton Bradley. It was in no way realistic or anything like a true war game, but it had planes and you shot each other down. I totally loved it. So it was no surprise that after I bought my first real war game, Tobruk, my next purchase was Richthofen's War by Randall Reed and published by Avalon Hill. Even though I had no live opponent, I played that game to death. It had the key things I was looking for. Dogfighting, of course, and a variety of different planes that all had unique stats and capabilities. That's always been part of the fascination with the World War I air war, the way planes improved and developed over the 4 years, as well as the strange directions some designs went. Manned flight at that point was only a decade old, so there was no preconceptions about what an airplane should or should not be. Richthofen's War came in a standard Avalon Hill bookcase box with a colorized photo of a Fokker DR-1 triplane on the cover. It has a mounted map, which is an aerial view of the front lines with trenches running through the middle and a hex grid superimposed over the whole thing. The counters are half-inch and not colored, so fairly drab by today's standard and fairly small, but each has an overhead view of the airplane in question. No stats, just the drawing, the name, and an ID number. The rules are in the fold-out style. If you remember Panzerblitz, it's like all the rules printed on something that folds out like a road map. It includes all the basic and advanced rules as well as stats for all the different planes in just that small amount of space. As well, there's an aircraft status pad. Each player uses a sheet from this pad for each of their aircraft. This is where you record your maximum and current speed, maximum and current altitude, how fast you can climb and dive, as well as your maneuver chart for how well you can turn. As well, this is where you'll record damage to your aircraft and your ammo expenditure. There's also a target damage table and a critical hit table for when the firing starts. And finally, there's a small book of historical notes and designer notes with a detailed look at each aircraft in the game. The game doesn't include every aircraft that flew in the war, but there's plenty to play with and some from each year of the war. Gameplay is fairly straightforward. You choose one of the supplied scenarios or design your own. You fill in your aircraft data cards with the stats, place your plane counters on the map, and away you go. This is an old school I go, you go game, which frustrated many players, and there have been efforts to downplay that aspect, which I'll get to later. Anyway, the first player announces any changes in speed or altitude and then moves their plane. And if this plane spent at least 2 movement points with another plane in its field of fire, after its movement may fire on the targeted plane. Likewise, if the moving plane spends at least 2 movement points in the enemy plane's field of fire, that plane can fire defensively on the moving plane. After any combat is resolved, the second player announces any changes to its speed or altitude and then moves their plane and attacks if possible. Back and forth like that. Attacking is a matter of rolling on the target damage table. The principal factors here are the type of plane firing and the range. If you score hits, they're marked on the opponent's aircraft status pad. There's no differentiations in this game for wing hits versus fuselage hits or engine hits or whatever, but each plane is just rated for durability, so a total maximum number of hit points, if you will. Obviously, some planes can take more hits than others before being shot down. There's also the possibility of critical hits with a small chart that will give more specific damage, such as engine hit or pilot wounded, and what that will mean for the plane going forward if it's a critical hit that doesn't down the plane. I've been basically so far describing a 1 versus 1 scenario, but you can have a few planes on each side and have a bigger dogfight. The fun in the game was always in trying to figure out how to best use a plane's characteristics versus the enemy plane's characteristics. Some planes are great climbers, some divers, some fast, some super maneuverable. The rules I've described so far are called the tournament rules, which are sort of like the medium rules. There's a basic game, but you can skip over that. And then there's some optional rules in a campaign game if you want to go farther. You might have noticed the absence of tailing described. In fact, there were no rules for it in the initial game. One of the big complaints about the game was it could turn into me getting behind you and firing, and then you getting behind me and firing, and back and forth, on and on. I never found it quite like that, not quite that simple, but sort of like that, so the point stands. A few years after publication, Avalon Hill published a supplement to the game, something called Richthofen's War Maneuver Cards. These cards added Immelmann's, wingovers, falling leafs, and all the era-specific fancy maneuvers you could ask for. And they also added tailing and being tailed into the game. Each player has a few of these maneuver cards, depending on his pilot status and the plane being flown. The tailed player chooses if they want to perform one of these maneuvers as a try to escape. If so, both players are dealt their allotment of cards. The defender chooses the one he wants to execute, and then the tailing player turns up his cards, and if any of those match the defender's maneuver, then the tailing player successfully follows the defender. If not, the tailer has to fly a straight ahead for that move. It should be noted the number of cards each player gets is dependent on the maneuver rating of the plane, as well as the ability of the pilot. And the defender always starts out with a couple more cards than the attacker. This improved the game immensely and got to the heart of the tailing and being tailed part of the air war. As well, this game's been played for a long time, and over the years, fans came out with ratings for planes that were not originally included in the game, not to mention all sorts of house rules. One of the most interesting of these was also published in the General magazine. It split the time increment for a move or a maneuver from 10 seconds simulated time to 5 seconds. So they sort of made everything happen. Not happen twice as fast, but the back and forth happened twice as often. You can check out Board Game Geek or ComSim World. There's plenty of variants for this game. You can find them all over the place, and if you look at the archives of the General magazine, you'll find a ton there. I still like this game. If somebody asked to play it, I'd definitely pull it out. I still have a copy. My next World War I air game is a complete departure from Richthofen's War. Ace of Aces doesn't have a board or counters. It's just two small, thick books filled with views from a cockpit. Like Richthofen's War, the basic game doesn't distinguish much between planes, but all that detail is added in later. The simple game starts like this. Both players open their books to a starting page. I think it's page 170, but I could be misremembering. In my book, I'll be looking out of my cockpit and see your plane in the distance. And in your book, you will have a similar view of me, but sort of mirrored. We can see each other. Along the bottom of the pages is a list of maneuvers at different speeds, with a page number under each one. We each secretly choose a maneuver, don't tell our opponent, but we tell our opponent the page number under our maneuver. I turn to the page you told me and look up my maneuver, which will give me an end page number. I then turn to the page number under my maneuver on that page. You do the same, and we'll both end up on the same end page, but with a new view of each other. If there are bullets flying in the picture, one of both of us are firing, and we roll for damage. And that's the simple heart of the game. We share a view of each other, we each pick a maneuver that sends us to another mid-page, that then tells us what end page we'll be on, and we get a new view. I tell you, it's heart-pumping when the new view suddenly shows your foe's plane much closer to you and peppering you. Of course, that's fairly simple, and Ace of Aces gives you much more detail if you want. Some maneuvers are rated as more difficult than others and therefore can't be attempted twice in a row or by a green pilot. As well, tailing is taken into account. If you're tailing me, I have to tell you if I'm going left, right, or straight before you choose your maneuver. And this gives you a much better chance of keeping the tail on me, as if I say I'm going left, you can choose one of your left maneuvers and hope to stay on my tail. There's also rules on climbing and diving, should you want them, and ratings for different planes that restrict speeds, climbs, dives, maneuvers, just as you'd expect. The original set of two books were called the Handy Rotary series, and the planes were typically the Fokker DR-1 and the Camel type with their rotary engines that pulled the plane hard to the right. And then they came out with the Powerhouse series, another two books where the planes went faster. Happily, you could fly a Rotary series book versus a Power series book. There was also a balloon busting set and I think perhaps an early war set, but I never got my hands on those. My first two sets of the game were just the books and the rules. And then they came out with a deluxe edition that had, it came in a box and had status sheets and had more plane stats and a more deluxe version altogether. It was published by Nova in my editions, but it's been long out of print. From time to time, I see flare-ups on the internet saying someone is close to reprinting it, but so far no luck. Still, worth checking out on the used market for sure. Next up for me was Dawn Patrol, a strange and wonderful game from TSR. For non-fantasy gaming fans, this was the company that owned Dungeons & Dragons at the time, I think. So they were known much more for their fantasy role-playing games. Dawn Patrol was billed as an aerial combat role-playing game. In essence, it took a bunch of the initial ideas of Richthofen's War, expanded on them, improved on a few, and then added on role-playing elements. But if you didn't want to role-play, you still had a great tactical air combat game. The paper map is, again, a top-down view of the front lines, but rather than a hex grid, it has a square grid superimposed. I don't know, perhaps TSR didn't want to scare off the role players with hexes. A bit short-sighted if that's the case. I also noticed that the game comes with two six-sided dice, but there's several rules where you're given a percentage chance to make a roll against something, and there's a little chart for how to convert six-sided dice into percentages. You'd think that if they were worried their audience was too much of a bunch of role players, those are exactly the people who would know what a 10-sided die was all about. Anyway, that's all long water under the bridge. The other thing you notice right away about this game is the counters. They're not thick like regular counters. They're just like sort of a thin cardboard, but they're 1 inch square and in full color. For its era, these counters were just gorgeous. The camo patterns and the plain painting patterns were fantastic. Some of this game is like Richthofen's War. Each plane type is rated for speed, climbing, diving, maximum altitude, turning ability, etc. As well, the game distinguishes between what kind of guns each plane has. And the ability to take damage is not just one overall number now, but each plane can take a differing amount of damage to its engine, its front fuselage, rear fuselage, tail, its right wing, center wing, and left wing. So the damage system is a little more detailed. The way the turns work are a lot like Ricky's War as well, but with a big difference. It's not a simple I go, you go system. It's pretty clear the game is designed for dogfights bigger than a simple 1 versus 1, although you can do that. But the way it works, at the start of every turn, every player rolls dice, and the order of movement, not firing, just movement, goes from the highest dice total to the lowest. So obviously you'd like to roll low and go last. But the added part here is that there are dice modifiers for clumsier planes or for planes at a lower altitude. And if you're tailing a plane, you don't roll the dice at all. You just go immediately after the plane you're tailing. So the whole sequence of movement is a bit random, but with some perks for tailing aircraft, obviously, and some handicaps for bad pilots or bad planes. Then finally, after all the planes have moved, combat takes place in any instance where a plane has an enemy within its field of fire. And that's the basics in a nutshell. There's a card system built in for maneuvers that are similar to the one in Richthofen's War, where a tailed plane can try to shake the tail. And there's a set of optional rules that can kind of condense that card system as well. So you've got two different card system possibilities for the tailing part of the game. And then, of course, there's that whole set of rules for the role-playing aspect with charts for rolling a random nationality, charts for medals, charts for rolling up random encounters. All good stuff if you're interested in following pilots through a campaign. Dawn Patrol is still very actively played. It has its own tight-knit community, like with Ace of Aces. I sometimes hear rumblings of a newly published of this version game as well, but it's pretty easy to pick up secondhand. If you want to check it out, they're not expensive. I think $20 will get you one. Finally, for the fourth game, a brand new entry in the field, Eagles in the Sky from Revolution Games. I did a detailed playthrough of a dogfight with this game on my YouTube channel, so if you really want to see this one up close, I encourage you to check it out. There's a ton of other World War I air games out there that are all built on a similar frame to Richthofen's War. They're the top-down view, the hex grid, the aircraft data log. You fly around, try to shoot the other planes down. But Eagles in the Sky has a bit of a different view. It still has the key element of differences between aircraft being the main point of interest. But here we have no real map. We have a map board, but it's not a top-down view like those other games. In the center, there's a main area where you put your plane, your counters, when they're not engaged in dogfighting. It's divided into 4 altitude bands: high, medium, low, and treetop. And then on the outside of that unengaged area, around the outside, there's several areas for dogfights for planes that are engaged with one another, with spaces to put the tailing and tailed planes. Speaking of planes, the counters here are fantastic. They are large and colorful, maybe even a little bigger than Dawn Patrol, but they're also thick, like a typical modern wargame counter. And the board is mounted. So it's a deluxe package in terms of components all around. This game reminds me more of Down in Flames or Wild Blue Yonder, the World War II dogfighting game in some ways. Like that game, the heart of this game is cards. How many cards each side gets is dependent on how many planes they have involved in the encounter and the quality of their flight leader for the engagement. There's 1 card per plane plus 1 to 3 cards more for the leader. Each plane is rated in 4 areas: climb, dive, speed, and agility. And the cards relate to these specifications. Each card is a maneuver card, but it's rated in 1 or sometimes 2 of these categories. So you might have a steep climb maneuver card that will be rated 3 climb, while you might have a wing over card that's rated 2 dive. All the maneuver cards have have some rating of 1 to 3, with a few 4s thrown in that are sort of like jokers. They give you 4 points, and they'll go on any of the four specifications. Each turn, whoever has the least planes left, or if they're tied the German, goes first. They select one of their planes and they play a maneuver card with it. If their plane is unengaged from any other plane, they can use this maneuver to try to engage another unengaged plane or to try to join in an ongoing dogfight. Or if the plane they want to use is already engaged, the card can be used to try to better its position if it's tailing an enemy, or try to shake a tailing enemy off its tail. The way it works is pretty simple. Say I'm unengaged and I'm trying to engage another unengaged plane. My Fokker DR1 has a decent agility rating of 7, so I play a maneuver card with a 3 rating for agility. I'm targeting your camel, which also is highly maneuverable with an agility rating of 8. My rating of 7 plus my card of 3 gives me a total agility of 10. You'll need to have a maneuver card with at least an agility rating of 2 to go with your camel's rating of 8 in order to keep me off your tail. If you don't have such a card, or you only have a card with lesser rating, I'm now going to be tailing you and I'll get a shot attempt. Once the planes are engaged, their counters are moved from the unengaged area over to one of the dogfight displays with the tailed player in front and the tailing plane, or later planes, behind. There's varying levels of proximity between the planes. If we take the example earlier, and suppose the camel had no card to counter with, the Fokker had 10 agility points with its rating and card, the camel had 8, so the difference is 2. So 2 would be the initial proximity. It can range from 1 to 6, with 6 being the closest. In future, the camel can try to outmaneuver the Fokker to reduce this proximity or even turn the tables, and the Fokker can work to increase the proximity. Proximity is important because the closer you are, the more likely your shot will hit. When you play a card to try to engage or to continue engaging an enemy and you succeed, you get to take a shot based on the proximity. The closer you are, the more likely to hit and damage the target you'll be. In Eagles in the Air, most planes can take a hit to the engine, wing, or controls and 2 hits to the structure before crashing. These hits that don't destroy an airplane will hinder its performance, however. Engine hits lower the speed rating, wing hits lower the dive and climb rating, etc. As well, some planes have stronger or weaker structures than others, and some have special vulnerabilities built in. So the planes are all very individual. In my games, it's been common to have a plane with single hits all over the place in different parts and still limping along, while another plane takes the first 2 hits to the engine and bang, they're crashed to the ground. Each engagement is only 8 turns long, so it's also possible no one is shot down, and the winner is determined by whose planes are in better shape when they return home. Oh, and I should also mention there's a random event each of the 8 turns of an encounter except for the first. These can add a plane or remove a plane from either side. They can change the weather or add clowns. They generally mess with your plans. There's also rules for climbing or diving to change the altitude band that a plane is in, as well as rules for escaping from an engagement in an effort to save your plane and pilot. And then, after all that, there's a whole extra rulebook to cover the campaign game system. The first rulebook just tells you how to dogfight. But the campaign game system, there's 4 campaigns included. 2 are historical, and then there's 2 that are templates for to help you make your own. this adds a whole extra level of fun to the game. The general setup here is that each player has 12 initial pilots and 12 planes. Depending on the campaign game you're playing, you're going to play 4 to 8 missions every day for 4 to 6 days, and that'll be the entire campaign. There's a chart you roll on in each of the campaign to see what those missions will be. The fun part is that as each mission comes up, both players secretly allocate which pilots and planes they're going to use in that mission. So you have no idea how many pilots or which planes your opponent is going to be using. Also, of course, if the plane is a bombing mission or photo recon, for example, the attacking side is going to get an extra plane, an extra what they call a mission plane, capable of doing the bombing or the photo recon stuff. So you don't know how many planes I'm sending up, and I don't know how many you're sending up. But you can't just send up the maximum amount every time, because critically in the campaign, pilots suffer fatigue or injury and planes suffer damage. A bit of damage can be fixed between missions, but most of it has to be repaired in the evening between days. As well, you will get a chance to get replacement pilots and aircraft in the evening between days, but it's not guaranteed, and the new pilots are going to be green or inexperienced. So asset management really is the key here. You can't simply send out 4 or more planes every mission, as you're going to exhaust your pilots. Anyway, back to how it works. You both secretly assign your pilots and the planes, and then you reveal them. And then a chit is drawn from a cup that tells you whether you play out this mission or simulate it. If it's simulated, it's just a matter of rolling on a table. If you play it out, you'll have all the results at the end of the engagement. You count up the victory points as usual, but there may also be some glory points for special accomplishments. Those victory points and glory points will determine each side's campaign victory points, which are entered on a campaign log, and then you move on to the next mission. Most campaign points by the end wins. Fairly simple. I have to say, the campaign game really vaults Eagles in the Air into a more interesting game than just a dogfighting game. Eagles also includes a few aces for each side, each of whom has his own ratings and special abilities, and these can easily be added into the random flight leader draws if you wish. Though I have to say, I'm going to take away points from the game's overall rating due to the glaring absence of Billy Bishop from the aces mixture. I don't know how this slipped by the designer and the developer. It's a bit of a mystery, but somehow it happened. Anyway, I'm sure somebody's going to come up with their own home rules for Billy Bishop and any other aces that aren't included. So there's 4 fairly different takes on World War I air combat. That's just a sliver of what's available in this genre. I mean, there's many that I haven't played, but I have also played Knights of the Air from Avalon Hill back in the day. I found it. It's funny. It was billed as being way more realistic than Richthofen's were, but I just found it dry and unfun, so I sold that one along. I got myself a kit of Wings of Glory. That's the one with you might have seen in stores with the beautiful pre-painted minis. They're just gorgeous. But for me, it was just too much measuring, and it was just too minis-like for my taste. I'm not a minis guy, so I sold that one as well. I bought it because I thought at the time I thought maybe I could intrigue my 7-year-old son at the time, but he didn't take to it either. So I passed that one along. And if you remember last time, I mentioned a new game that I purchased last episode called Age of Dogfights. I haven't had the courage to tackle the crafting project that it's going to take to assemble that one yet, so no word there. I haven't tried it yet, but I'm sure to, as I love these games. And, I should also mention Terry Simo's Bloody April. I haven't played that one yet, but it's a Charles S. Roberts Awards winner, and my understanding is that the scale in that game is slightly higher, so counters are not single planes, but flights of 1 to 5 planes. So it sounds to me like managing a campaign is also the goal here, and I think it's a more detailed look at a campaign than, say, Eagles in the Sky. Anyway, I just have to say I'd play any of these 4 games at the drop of the hat. Eagles is my current favorite, but it's also the newest, so I suppose it has an advantage. I know there's a strain of wargamers out there who aren't interested in air games. If that's you, I'm sorry about that. I thank you for listening. But if you're an air game enthusiast, let me know which ones you play and which ones you like. There's still a ton that I haven't played. Time for bouquets. Okay. Hats off to IKEA for real this time. The remaining pieces of my shelving finally arrived. I have the shelves all up, all the games are off the floor and out of the office. They still need a better sorting system, but for now I'm happy, my wife's happy, and the basement is now coming back into some semblance of order and shape. Parting shots. Somewhere down the line, I'm going to take on the thorny questions of what is a war game, how can we be more inclusive, and how can we grow our hobby? But I have to say, as important as those questions are, I'm just too hot and tired to face them this month. Besides, it feels to me like we're in another golden age of wargaming. When I was first getting into the hobby, my options were limited to the few new games Avalon Hill published every year, or take a chance on the rush jobs that SPI was cranking out every month. Eventually, we got a few more small publishers like GDW and Uquinto, but it was still a very small universe of titles. But now, there's no way to keep up with all the games and all the publishers. There's more games on more topics than I ever dreamed possible back then. And so much of it is of a very good quality. I hope that helps with the inclusivity issue. There certainly feels to me like there's a game for everyone out there. There is for me. Too many by far. There's no way I can play every game I'm interested in. And while that triggers my imaginary OCD, I have to admit it's not a bad problem to have in the dog days of summer. Thanks for listening. Again, you can reach me at grant@pushingcardboard.com, at the website or the Discord server, or on Twitter at cardboardpusher. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, check your six.